Rain was all I could hear until her scream ripped through the phone. Then came the sound I'll never forget, the sharp hollow crack of bones breaking. The line went dead. My mother's voice vanished into the static, and something inside me died with her. Hit like, subscribe for more betrayal stories, and comment your city or country. I was stationed overseas that night, halfway across the world, counting down the days till my short leave. My mother had been sick for weeks, and the guilt of being away was already eating me alive. She tried to hide her pain on our calls, always smiling, telling me she was fine. But that night, something in her tone felt different, quieter, heavier. She said there had been men outside the house again, parked cars with tinted glass, same faces, same voices. She thought maybe she had imagined it, but deep down she knew she hadn't. The last thing she said before the line began to crackle was, "Blake, if anything happens," then came shouting. Then the thud of someone kicking the door. And then that sound. I froze, not as a soldier, as a son. Someone grabbed her. I could hear her screaming my name, but I couldn't get through. My voice was trapped behind miles of static and time zones, and before I could call anyone, the line went cold. Every training drill, every battle, every mission I ever succeeded at, all of it meant nothing that second. I wasn't a protector anymore. I was the reason she was alone in that house. For 2 hours, I kept trying her number. Every ring cut out after one tone. I called neighbors, local hospitals, the precinct, and none of them picked up. Not one. It was 2 a.m. when a nurse finally answered from St. Jude's Hospital. Her voice was shaking. She whispered, "She's alive, but her legs are gone. Gone." The word made my whole body go numb. They said, "A home invasion gone wrong," but that was a lie on its own legs. I knew the sound of cruelty, the sound of violence for pleasure, and that night, those cops didn't come to rob, they came to punish. My mom lived in a quiet neighborhood on the edge of town, a plain little street where everyone knew everyone. She raised me alone after my father died in a training accident. My father had been respected in the army, disciplined, honest, too honest for some. He'd exposed a bribery chain involving high-ranking defense contractors and local authorities a year before his death. After he died, my mom became the ghost of his memory, a woman the town treated with polite distance like they didn't want her truth rubbing off on them. Weeks before the attack, she started telling me about some police officers hanging around her shop. 2 of them, Preston and Ryder. They'd been bothering her, making offhand jokes, flirting when she paid them no attention. One even dropped a comment like, "It's weird how accidents just happen in your family." She laughed it off until one night she caught them switching the security footage on her store's laptop. They didn't know she had a backup. That video, that's what they came for. It didn't matter that she was a widow, 63 years old, or that she had nothing left but me. Those men beat her like she meant nothing, because in their world, she didn't. They broke both her legs to make a point that no one crosses them. And then they left her lying in her own blood, her phone still on, as if to let me hear what defiance costs. By dawn, I was on a plane home. The flight felt longer than the war. The images in my mind looped endlessly. Her calling my name, the crack, the silence. My fists dug into the armrest so tight the plastic splintered. Every time the engines hummed, I saw their faces laughing. When I landed, the world looked different. Even sunlight felt wrong. The town was quiet when I arrived, too quiet, like everyone already knew. Neighbors didn't meet my eyes. Some whispered as I passed. I didn't go home first. I went straight to the hospital. Her room smelled of disinfectant and rainwater. Machines beeped softly around her like guilt. Her face pale, bruised, swollen. Her legs wrapped in steel frames. She wasn't asleep. She was staring at the ceiling, whispering something I barely heard. Nothing I could have said mattered. Every apology felt useless. She tried to stop me from falling apart, but her trembling hand couldn't grip mine like before. That hand had stitched my childhood wounds, wiped my tears, built my whole sense of safety, and now it shook just to hold a paper cup. I walked out in silence. Outside her room, a man in a gray coat stood waiting. His name was Colin, a lawyer my mother had trusted for years. He looked exhausted, wearing that expression men wear when they've seen an innocent person crushed by something bigger than law. "They covered it up," he muttered. "The department called it a random assault. Body cams malfunctioned. The chief signed off the report within an hour." He paused, then added, "You know your mom's camera caught everything, right? They didn't find the extra drive." The words hit like gunfire. Evidence existed. Proof existed. But for that proof to matter, those who enforced justice needed to believe in it, and none of them did. Colin handed me a small black USB. Don't lose this. It's your father's and now hers. It's the only truth left unbroken. Before I could ask anything more, a nurse came running. My mom's blood pressure spiked and I rushed back. Sitting beside her, I watched her try to smile through the pain she didn't deserve. I told your father once, she whispered weakly. You can't win against the bad if you fight like them. Promise me you'll stay clean, Blake. I nodded, but deep down, I already knew. Her kind of clean didn't win wars anymore. Later that night, I drove home. The front door was still dented where they had kicked it in. The smell of fear lingered, soaked into the carpet, into the walls. As I stood in the empty living room, I saw a small photo frame shattered on the floor. My father's picture in uniform, his nameplate still reading Captain Dean. Beside it, something glinted in the light, a broken police badge half burned, Rider's badge number. That was their first mistake. They left a piece of themselves behind. They thought she was just another widow in a weak town. They had no idea the man she raised. I didn't sleep. Instead, I replayed the footage from the USB Colin gave me. It showed everything. 2 police cruisers, officers laughing, my mom begging, then riders stepping forward, the first kick to her knee, a laugh that echoed through the camera microphone, and another voice, calm, deep, drunk with arrogance for fun. That voice belonged to their leader, the chief himself, Victor Hale, a man once decorated for bravery, now sitting on the top of corruption like a throne. The video ended midlife. I sat there in darkness, fists bleeding from gripping the table too tight. The screen reflected my face, but it didn't look like mine anymore. Down the hall, thunder rattled the windows. My heart followed that rhythm, slow, heavy, deliberate. Rage wasn't even the right word. It was something older than rage, something carved into bloodlines. When injustice repeats generations deep, when the rain stopped, I looked at my father's photo again. He never lived to see the evil beneath the badge. She suffered because truth was his legacy. Somewhere out there, those officers were still laughing, drinking, sleeping peacefully. They thought they broke her. The truth is that night they created me, because I wasn't coming back as her son. I was coming back as the nightmare they mocked into existence, and when this ends, not a single one of them will remember what it feels like to stand. Morning light didn't reach that hospital window. It was the kind of gray light that makes everything look colder than it already is. My mother slept under a drug haze, whispering half words, caught somewhere between pain and memory. I sat beside her in silence, replaying every second from that video, memorizing every smirk on their faces, every laugh that fed off her screams. The nurse told me she hadn't stopped apologizing all night. She kept saying things like, I shouldn't have kept the footage, or, I should have called sooner. She blamed herself for surviving. That's the kind of world she lived in now, where innocent people felt guilty for being targets. I couldn't let her live that way. Not in shame, not in fear. So, while she slept, I started piecing together everything she'd left behind. Inside her purse was a chain of notes, old receipts, scribbled numbers, names written in the margins. She had been tracking something, a pattern, payments made to the same accounts through a business front called Blue Marlin Security. I recognized one of the names, Sergeant Preston. Another name circled twice, Victor Hale. She'd known. She'd been trying to expose them all over again. 2 doors down from her room was the police-appointed guard. One officer posted outside to ensure safety, but I knew what that really meant. To watch, to listen, to report. I walked past him once, pretending to grab coffee. He didn't say a word, but his eyes lingered too long, hands too steady on his belt. Those were hands of a man who had done this kind of work before. I went home again that evening. Same broken door, same silence. The street was quiet. No reporters, no curious neighbors. That meant word had already been swept under the rug. I stepped inside and turned the lights on. The air still smelled faintly of cleaning chemicals, maybe from when the so-called investigation team had come through, but they didn't clean everything. Near the edge of the rug was dried blood my mop hadn't touched. My mother's blood. You can wipe a floor, but not what it does to memory. I leaned down, stared at it for a long minute, then picked up her old camera from the shelf. The lens was cracked, but it still turned on. There were clips not from the night of the attack, but before it. She'd been documenting them. The first video showed her sitting in the shop, pretending to check inventory while filming the cops outside. Preston leaning against his cruiser, smirking. Ryder lighting a cigarette with his badge still hanging from his chest. They'd been coming every other day. The second clip was even worse. They were inside the shop laughing, telling her to be careful what she says about officers. Preston called her trouble with pretty eyes. She tried to ignore him. The tone changed when she mentioned her army son. That's when they decided she wasn't a woman. She was a threat. I shut the camera off. I didn't need more proof of what I already knew in my bones. Back at the hospital, Colin was waiting again. He looked heavier, not physically, but morally weighed down. He had been to the precinct that morning. They're pretending it never happened. Said they got no warrant, no suspects. Reports just disappeared. I stared at him for a long time. What about the chief? He looked away. He's making jokes about it in the cafeteria. Silence filled the room between us. Long, dangerous silence. Because some silences don't mean calm. They mean warlording. Quietly in the background. That night, my mother woke again. She saw the look on my face and already knew. She'd seen that look before, back when my father started chasing after truths that no one wanted revealed. Don't bury yourself in this, she whispered, voice cracking in pieces. They already took everything from me. Don't let them take you too. I didn't answer. She looked so small lying there, half her body broken, spirit fenced in with steel. I wanted to tell her that I'd stay clean, that I wouldn't cross lines, but her face made that promise impossible, because all I could see was what they had done to her. Later, I walked out of the hospital, into the freezing night air. The whole town felt crooked, the lampposts hummed, flickering as if the place itself wanted to stay in the dark. Across the street, someone stood watching. Same man from earlier, the posted guard. Only this time, he wasn't in uniform, just a leather jacket and a familiar smile. When he saw me looking back, he got into a black unmarked car and drove off slow, taunting. That was their message. We're still here, we always watch. It took everything in me not to chase that car. Instead, I went back to my father's old workshop behind the house, the one armored with memories of harder times. Inside, between crates of his old military gear, I found the last thing I needed. Not a weapon, but a letter. It was one he'd written to my mom before he died. A copy she must have kept hidden. It read, "If anything ever happens to me, keep your eyes on the ones who smile during funerals." That's where corruption hides in comfort. That letter became my war map. The cops thought this was about pain. It wasn't. It was about pattern. Every corrupt man leaves a trail. Ego, greed, or fear. And all I had to do was trace it backward until I reached the man who smiled at my father's funeral. I started visiting places connected to the precinct. Bars they drank at, garages they used. I didn't talk much, just listened. Small towns always talk if you know how to listen right. A bartender mentioned a man named Dominic, retired cop, living near the edge of town. Said he left the force after some bad memories with Victor Hale. That was my first lead. I found Dominic the next morning outside a run-down motel fixing an old Chevy. His badge tattoo had faded under the years, but his eyes still had that haunted cop look, the kind that remembers too much. He didn't seem surprised when I told him who I was. Apparently, everyone in town already knew. He didn't sugarcoat it. They were gods here. Victor runs everything from traffic tickets to blackmail. Nobody touches him, because half the town owes him. Your mom was supposed to hand over that footage quietly. When she didn't, they decided to make an example. My stomach turned hearing the words, "make an example." Dominic lit a cigarette, staring into the distance like a man replaying his regrets. I told Victor years ago, you can't keep burying your past crimes under new ones. Eventually, someone digs. He looked right at me then. Guess you're digging now. He gave me a name, a local journalist, Fiona, who had been investigating the same files my mom had stumbled on. If she's still alive, he said, she can help you expose everything. I thanked him and left. But as I walked to my car, he called out, "Be careful what kind of justice you want, soldier. Sometimes truth isn't cleaner than revenge." He was right, but I wasn't listening anymore, because by the time I reached home, I noticed something shoved under the door. Another envelope. The handwriting made my throat tighten instantly. It was my mom's. She must have written it before the attack. A letter that probably never got the chance to reach me. It said, "If they ever touch me, don't come home angry, come home ready." That night, I reread those words a dozen times. Then I looked out the window at the street above, quiet, almost peaceful, except for the faint hum of engines somewhere in the dark distance. The town slept under corruption like a blanket, but that silence felt like it was waiting for something. Maybe for me, because this wasn't just about her anymore. It was about every mother who raised her son believing the uniform meant protection, not predation. Every woman who got laughed at for seeking justice. They'd broken her to send a message. But the only thing that message did was wake a part of me that even war couldn't. By dawn, I had packed a duffel bag and laid the USB beside it. For now, revenge wasn't the goal. Truthless, but truth when delivered right, can break bones much worse than fists ever could. And somewhere between my mother's hospital bed and Victor Hale's smirk, I knew this story wasn't ending with their laughter. It was starting with mine. The flight home should have given me enough time to calm down, but rage isn't a passenger that ever sits quietly. Every turbulence, every mechanical hum, sounded like a countdown in my chest. When the wheels finally hit home soil, I didn't feel relief, I felt purpose. The kind of purpose that comes when you've already buried the part of you that used to forgive. I didn't tell anyone I was back. No one except Colin, the lawyer. He texted that my mother had been moved to a private room for her security, he said. But I didn't believe in that word anymore. Security was what failed her. When I walked into the hospital again, the nurse's eyes dropped. That's when I knew. Word had spread that someone important was about to cause trouble. My uniform drew whispers through the hallway. The same town that once welcomed me home with flags, now treated me like trouble wrapped in honor. My mom was asleep when I entered. Machines surrounded her like a cage of kindness, pretending to be mercy. Her breathing was shallow. Her hair turned silver overnight. I pulled a chair beside her bed. For a moment, I said nothing. Then the anger cracked into something shakier. Guilt. I remembered every birthday I'd missed. Every night she must have been alone, fixing broken things around the house while telling me not to worry. And all I had ever done was promise I'd keep her safe. But what does a promise mean when the ones you're protecting her from were the same flag you fight under? Colin came in quietly, holding files. He looked wide awake, though it was past midnight. Judge signed off on the warrant, he said softly, for the Blue Marlin business accounts, not for the men. So only the paper trail, I muttered. He nodded. It's something, but the DA's office will fight it. They think your mother's too unstable to testify. Unstable, that's what they called her now. A woman half crippled by their own police department, and they labeled her unstable to erase her voice. I leaned back in my chair, looking at the steady green line of her heartbeat. Then I'll testify, I said flatly. Colin's face changed, that complicated mix of admiration and fear. Blake, listen. These men have backing you can't see. Hale isn't just a police chief. He runs 3 shell investors, owns a judge, and has the DA drinking from his hand. Then I'll break the hand, I whispered. He sighed, rubbing his temples. If you go down this road, there's no winning clean. Are you ready for that? Clean doesn't fix broken bones, I said. I still on my mother's bandaged legs. I'm done staying clean. He didn't argue. He just left the papers on the table and walked away. The next morning, I requested something only a soldier would think of. Aerial imaging from the county. They owed me favors. I didn't tell them why. I just said I was investigating a lead for a private defense audit. Within hours, I had satellite visuals of Blue Marlin storage facilities. Police cruisers parked outside after hours, off-duty men going in and out. It wasn't just corruption. It was a playground of evil built under the badge. Before the sun went down, I went there. It was an old warehouse at the city's edge, surrounded by cracked asphalt and silence. My boots echoed against metal as I circled the perimeter, a chain-link fence half fallen, cameras pointed outward, but none inward. That told me more than enough. Through a small window, I saw evidence boxes stacked against the wall labeled confidential. The irony made me laugh under my breath. On a nearby desk, there were files, not just on my mother, but other cases thrown out, an assault report, a hit and run, a missing witness notice. Every one of them tied to the same precinct. Everyone buried. Then I heard laughter again. 2 officers walked out the side door talking like nothing mattered. I didn't move, just watched. Preston and Ryder, the same faces from the video. They looked relaxed, alive, proud. I wanted to step out. My body screamed for it, but not yet. Instead, I retreated, leaving them in their fake peace. This wasn't the place for foolish anger. This was the time for preparation. Later that evening, I met Fiona, the journalist Dominic had told me about. She lived in a small apartment above a bookstore, every corner covered in boxes of evidence and newspaper clippings. When I mentioned my mother's name, her voice faltered. She came to me before the attack, Fiona admitted. Said she had the footage that could destroy the entire precinct. Told me if anything happens, I should send it public. I pulled out the USB, my mom's. Her eyes widened. That's it. I nodded. She saved it on a hidden drive. But I need names, dates, connections before this goes anywhere. She began showing me printed email trails between the cops and the local businessmen. Payoffs labeled as community development funding. It was all there, enough to start a storm, just not enough to make it survive the first gust. I can help, she said, voice trembling. But once I print this, they'll come for both of us. They already came for my mother. Coming for me would be mercy compared to what they did to her. That night I drove her home, making sure no one followed. She smiled faintly before stepping out. You need allies, not ghosts, she said. It was the last thing I ever heard from her, because 2 nights later, Fiona vanished. Her phone disconnected, her apartment broken into, files gone. The bookstore owner said she packed her things and left in a hurry, but her landlord told a different story. Men in uniforms took her boxes for evidence. When I checked the local news, there was nothing, not even a missing persons mention. It was like she had never existed. And that's when I realized the cops weren't destroying evidence anymore. They were erasing people. Back at the hospital, my mother noticed my silence. She grabbed my wrist, weak but steady. You found someone, didn't you? She asked softly. I didn't answer. Her eyes watered. Please don't lose who you are, son. I looked away. Who I am is what they broke. Her tears rolled slow down her cheek. Then rebuild it without hate. Promise me that. Don't let hate aim for the wrong target. I wanted a promise. I didn't. That night, while she slept, I sat in the waiting room staring at the dark window reflection. Behind me, machines beeped softly. Outside, one police cruiser stood parked across the street. Headlights off, watching. They didn't even hide now. They were daring me to try something. My reflection didn't flinch. When dawn bled into the glass, I finally whispered to no one. You started something you can't control, because this war wasn't ending in darkness. It was beginning with light, and this time, silence wasn't surrender. By the next morning, my plan wasn't written anywhere. It was living in every heartbeat. Quiet, patient, ready. Not all soldiers use weapons. Some use truth sharpened by loss, and these men, they were about to drown in it. The day after Fiona vanished, the whole town carried that eerie quiet that follows when everyone knows something awful happened, but decides to pretend it didn't. The morning news was all weather reports and charity events. Nothing about a missing journalist. Yet every instinct told me she was gone because she had touched the truth bare-handed. I parked 2 blocks from the precinct and watched the building through a cracked windshield. Cars came and went, officers joking outside, coffee in hand, business as usual. Somewhere inside that gray concrete box sat the men who crippled my mother and the man who made them untouchable. Inside, I wasn't just angry, I was strategic. I walked into a local cafe across from the station, bought the corner table where the cameras couldn't reach, and opened my laptop. The files from Fiona's backup drive were still safe because she had sent a cloud link before disappearing. Inside, ledger after ledger, payments routed through fake charities to Victor Hale's accounts. Blue Marlin wasn't a side business. It financed everything from evidence tampering to officer bonuses for silence. By noon, I had enough proof to bury them in paperwork, if not in dirt. But the law wasn't built for justice. It was built for delay. And delay was how corruption survived. That's when Dominic called. His voice was rougher this time, like he already regretted dialing. They know you've got the files, he said. Victor's tightened his circle. You're inside the storm now. I asked where Fiona was. He paused too long. If she's lucky, she's hiding. If not, stay away from the river docks. The docks? Why mention that if she wasn't there? That evening, I drove down anyway. Fog rolled over the water like smoke. Empty crates lined the edge, and behind them, the faint gleam of a phone screen lying half buried in mud. Fiona's. The cracked display was still glowing faintly. One unfinished message on screen. They found out about the DA. The message ended midword. I slipped the phone into my pocket and looked toward the warehouse district. Engines echoed faintly, then laughter. Even the river seemed to hold its breath. Back home, I poured every new file into a single folder labeled Truth Debt. It wasn't a file for me, it was a death sentence for them if anything happened again. I sent an encrypted copy to Colin with one line. If I disappear, this goes public. He responded within a minute. Understood. But they're watching you. Careful. Careful wasn't in my blood anymore, but focus was. The next few days passed in a strange rhythm. I split my time between hospital visits and quiet investigations that looked more like routine errands. I followed bank trails, sat in unmarked cars, listened more than I spoke. Corruption leaves crumbs when it gets comfortable, and these men were gorged on comfort. At the hospital one afternoon, my mother looked stronger. The doctors had reduced her sedation, but her voice still trembled when she spoke. "I heard you're causing waves," she said without opening her eyes. "You think you're saving me, but you're just feeding their fear." I sat by her side, careful not to answer. Sometimes silence is the only honesty left between mother and son. That night, while the sky turned bruised purple, Colin called again. "Got a judge brave enough to listen. Name's Harper Lane. Doesn't know Hale, anything yet. She'll hear you, but it can't look like a vendetta. That ship sailed," I said. "Then make it look like justice." 2 hours later, under flickering courthouse lights, I handed Harper the first packet. Financial proof? Personnel logs? Hale's offshore wire transfers. She examined every page slowly. "If this is real," she whispered. "He's not a police chief, he's a dictator." "It's real," I said, sliding Fiona's broken phone across the desk. Her message still on screen. Harper closed her eyes for a second. When she opened them again, something colder lived there. "You didn't get this from me," she said quietly. "But tomorrow there will be an internal audit. Keep your head down." As I left the courthouse, sirens screamed in the distance. Not emergency sirens, celebratory bursts. Someone somewhere was covering tracks. By morning, news broke. A warehouse fire at the river docks. The same docks where I found Fiona's phone. Electrical malfunction. Headlines said, 2 drowned workers. No names released. And beside the article, a small note. Journalist, linked with false corruption claims, leaves town. They'd made her vanish twice, once from life and now from memory. My mother saw the headline. She didn't cry. She just said, "They're erasing witnesses now." I nodded quietly. "Then I'll stop being a witness." That night, Dominic called again. He sounded restless. "You need to meet someone," he said. "An accountant who used to run the money transfers for Victor. Name's Julian Cross. He's hiding out, scared, but he has files even you don't have." "Where?" "Old church storage on 9th. Midnight, come alone." It felt wrong, like bait wrapped in truth, but I went. The old church was half collapsed, moonlight spilling through stained glass like broken blessings. Inside, I found a man pacing near the altar, clutching a folder. Julian, thin, nervous, stuttering through every word. "I didn't mean to, they forced me to change the entries." "Please, just take it," he said, shoving the folder forward. I opened it. Inside were photocopies of checks, some written out to Blue Marlin, others to a name I hadn't seen before. Hale Industries. It wasn't just a slush fund. It was a full-scale network owned by Victor Hale himself. My father's death, my mother's attack. It all linked back to these accounts. I looked up to thank Julian, but the sound of a car door slammed outside. Headlights sprayed through the cracked glass. Julian's face turned white. They followed me. I pulled him toward the basement stairs, but before we reached them, gunfire tore through the door. Splinters rained across the pews. One bullet caught Julian in the chest. He fell without a sound. I dragged the folder into the shadows, heart hammering against the old stone. Outside, boots crunched gravel, steady, trained. Then a voice I recognized all too well drawled through the doorway. "Come on out, soldier." Victor Hale said, "You're making this harder than it needs to be." I didn't move. His tone was lazy, confident, but I could hear the alcohol behind it. He wasn't here for arrest. He was here for intimidation. He stepped inside, pistol loose at his side. "You want truth? Here's truth. Your mom lived because I let her." Every word dripped poison. He laughed low. "You think I'm scared of some broken-hearted vet? You don't have the power to touch me." Maybe not then, but he was wrong about the power because I wasn't planning to touch him. I was planning to expose him. As soon as he stepped deeper into the shadows, I pressed the record key on the small mic clipped under my jacket, the same one I used overseas for mission locks. His voice, his threat, his arrogance, all of it captured clean. He kicked Julian's body once and muttered, "Clean this mess faster next time." Then he left, whistling. When the echo faded, I finally stood, blood on my hands, heart beating like a drum line of vengeance. I looked down at the folder, at the evidence bought with another life lost, and whispered the promise I had made quietly that first night over my mother's hospital bed. They think fear keeps people quiet. Let's see how loud fear sounds when it's theirs. Back outside, I felt dawn creeping up behind the clouds. No birds, no cars, just a bruised sky listening to everything I carried. Corruption had ruled this town for decades behind polite smiles, but now it had a price, and someone was finally collecting. Dawn found me sitting in my car, engine off, hands shaking around a blood-stained folder. Julian's death still echoed through my skull like thunder trapped inside bone. Another life crushed because I touched the truth too deep. I should have felt fear. Instead, I just felt empty. Julian had said he never meant to do it. None of them ever meant to until they did, until orders turned into habits and habits into crimes. I'd seen that before overseas. Men in uniform forgetting the difference between duty and ego. Only here it wasn't on foreign soil, it was home. The recording from last night sat saved on a tiny drive in my pocket. Victor Hale's own words dripping arrogance and guilt. I replayed it again just to hear the part where he said, "Your mom lived because I let her." I wanted that sentence carved on every wall in his life. By 8 a.m., I was back at the hospital. My mother was awake, sunlight, bruising her face and lines through the blinds. She studied me with that quiet suspicion that only mothers have when they know their children have crossed some line they can't see but can feel. "What did you do?" she asked softly. I set the bag down beside her bed. "Nothing yet," I said, and slipped the recorder into her drawer. "But his time's coming." She turned her head toward the window, eyes glistening. "I raised you to build, not break." I almost smiled. "Sometimes you have to break what's already rotten." She closed her eyes, too tired to argue, maybe too wise to try. Colin called later that morning. He'd heard about the fire, about the gunshots at the church. "You need to leave town," he whispered. "They'll call you the shooter next. They can't prove what doesn't exist." "Blake, listen. Hale's got the DA, the police union, and the press in his pocket. If he says the sky is green, they'll paint it that way." That's when it hit me. Truth needed something stronger than proof. It needed spectacle. So, I started building one. That night, under a flickering streetlight, I met Dominic again. He looked thinner, guilt chewing on his edges. "Someone killed that accountant," he said, voice low. I stared back. "He was killed before your conscience kicked in." He flinched. "You think I didn't warn you?" "Warning me isn't fixing," I said. "Want to fix it? Help me make this loud." He looked around nervous. "How loud?" "Louder than their silence." He finally nodded. "You've got one shot. Hale's hosting a fundraiser next week, with his investors, half the county's elite in one room. If you leak your files there, there's no covering it fast enough." I nodded slowly, plans already aligning. Then that's where the lies bleed out. The next few days blurred into preparation. I forged a fake donor ID with old military credentials, something official enough to pass quick glances. I stitched the microphone into my collar, backup drives in the lining of my jacket, phone camera pointed forward. Every movement rehearsed until it stopped feeling like murder and started feeling like mission. The night arrived layered in thunderclouds. The event was a gaudy affair inside the town's old courthouse. Strings of lights, shining silverware, the smell of corruption disguised as perfume. Every kind of power strutted there. The police, brass, business owners, even the district attorney smiling for pictures beside Victor Hale himself. He looked exactly the same as on the footage. Smile sharp, eyes bored, confidence unearned. I walked in through the side door, shaking hands, blending with donors in suits far cleaner than mine. From the corner, I spotted Dominic near the bar, pretending not to know me. Colin, too, in a black suit, held his phone ready in case the plan turned fire. A woman stepped to the podium, introducing Hale with fake applause. Cameras flashed. He began his speech, voice oiled with charm. "We built this department on integrity," he said. "Our people lay their lives for justice." I wanted to laugh. Instead, I pressed the button on my collar. The tiny projector in my pocket hummed awake, syncing to the courthouse's Wi-Fi. Dominic's hack. Within seconds, the wall behind Hale flickered from his slideshow to the video. Police laughing, my mother screaming, the sound of bones breaking, and finally his voice. Clear, undeniable. "She lived because I let her." The room froze, gasps, phones raised, reporters whispering names. Hale turned around, face draining color in real time. He pointed toward the tech booth, yelling orders, but it was too late. The video looped again, broadcast beyond the building through live stream links Colin had already posted. Every screen now carried the proof of his cruelty. Panic hit the crowd like thunder. Some shouted, others fled. Dominic watched from the doorway, jaw tight, knowing returning to the badge after this was impossible. Hale slammed the podium. Cut it off. Security scrambled. The lights flickered, then died completely. When emergency lights flickered back, Hale was gone, vanished into the back halls like the cockroach he was. I didn't chase. Not yet. The world had just shifted. Outside, reporters surrounded the exits, shouting questions, but I melted away through the service corridor. My phone buzzed, calling again. Blake, it's everywhere. You did it. But be ready. They won't go quietly. I drove straight to the hospital. The news played on waiting room TVs. Headlines screamed, police chief caught on tape. Patients whispered, nurses pointed. My mother lay awake watching the screen in disbelief. Her eyes filled slowly, not with rage, but something like relief carved with sorrow. You needed to show the world, she said, voice trembling. Just tell me it's over. It's never over, I said softly. But it started. The door opened behind me. A nurse stepped in carrying a small envelope. This came for you, she murmured. Inside was a photo, old grainy, a group of uniformed men standing beside my father, smiling proudly. At the edge of the photo, one familiar face, a younger Victor Hale, hand on my father's shoulder. On the back, a typed message. You think he died in training? He didn't. The world tilted. It wasn't just about my mother anymore. It was about my father too. His death was an accident. It was foundation. Every brick of their empire built on what they buried him under. I looked at my mother. There's something I need to know about Dad. Her hand trembled. Not now, please. Mom, I said gently, even though my heart already knew. What did Hale have to do with him? She turned her head away, tears streaking down her face. Everything. The monitors beeped faster. The room felt smaller. And for the first time since I came home, I wasn't sure if the truth was what I really wanted anymore. Because every lie I dug up was starting to bleed into the next, and somewhere behind all that blood, my father's ghost was waiting for me to finish what he couldn't. The morning after the video went live, the entire town woke in disbelief. Streets filled with whispers and flashing cameras. Half the precinct called in sick. What none of them realized was that sickness wasn't leave, it was guilt spreading like infection. The State Bureau announced a temporary suspension for Victor Hale, but temporary was their favorite word for delay. Reporters surrounded every corner of the hospital. My mother's room turned into both sanctuary and prison. She hated the attention. They watch me like an exhibit, she whispered, sinking deeper into the bedsheets. I just want quiet, but silence wasn't mercy anymore. It was a weapon I needed them to hear breaking. Colin brought legal drafts for a grand investigation. The governor smelled blood. He said a task force is being formed. The DA's panicking, but Hale still walks free. Claims it's all fabricated. He glanced toward my mother. The recording alone won't convict him. We need her to confirm it. She shook her head immediately. I can't. Her gaze drifted to the door like the walls might be listening. They'll come back. They always come back. I took her hand. Mom, the world finally believes you. You don't have to be afraid anymore. She smiled faintly, sadder than before. You think fear leaves just because truth shows up? Colin cleared his throat. Then maybe fear needs help finding the exit. That same afternoon, the hearing date came through. Closed-door session at the county courthouse. 24 hours later, Internal Affairs versus Victor Hale. I didn't sleep that night. I reread every file. Julian, Fiona, my father, every face lost to his corruption until dawn blurred the pages. When morning hit, I dressed in plain clothes. Not the uniform, not army green, just a sun and borrowed strength. Security escorted my mother into the courthouse on a stretcher. Cameras screaming questions neither of us answered. Inside, Hale waited in an expensive suit. Arrogance polished to sheen. He leaned to his lawyer, smirked like the cameras were art made just for him. You'll regret this circus, he said under his breath. The judge called order before I could answer. Harper Lane presided. Same judge who had seen the first files. Something in her eyes told me she'd come prepared for war disguised as procedure. Case number 6147, she said. State versus Victor Hale at all charges. Official misconduct, obstruction, aggravated assault. Hale's lawyer rose smoothly. My client denies all charges. Evidence has been tampered with by unqualified parties, including this man. He stabbed a finger toward me whose personal vendetta taints every document presented. Judge Lane didn't blink. "Play the audio," she ordered, and there it was again, the voice that haunted everything. She lived because I let her. The room froze. For a second, even sounds seemed to kneel beneath that arrogance. Hale flinched the smallest bit, then recovered with practiced ease. "Deep fake nonsense. Anyone can edit military recordings." Colin stepped forward. "Not this one. Metadata confirms original timestamps. Recorded night of Julian Cross's death. You were there." Hale laughed loud enough for the recorders to catch. "Julian was a thief who killed himself. I tried to stop him." His tone slid into polished pity like he'd rehearsed it in mirrors. I felt the air tighten around my chest, fists aching to remember simpler answers. But the judge lifted a hand. "Mr. Hale." Silence until cross-examination. Then she turned to my mother. "Mrs. Dean," she said gently, "you're not obliged to testify if it harms your health, but your statement could decide this case." My mother looked at me, years of strength, pain, and forgiveness in one glance. Her voice barely rose above a whisper. "He came to my house that night," she said. "They said they'd make me forget what I saw. They laughed and he watched." Hale slammed both palms on the table. Lies from a broken woman. Security stepped forward, but my mother didn't flinch. "You call me broken," she said evenly. "But the only thing broken here is the law you swore to uphold." Gasps rippled through the chamber. Harper Lane's gavel struck once. Order. Then something unexpected happened. The door opened and Dominic walked in. Badge tossed on the table. Uniform gone. Civvies wrinkled from sleepless nights. He carried a flash drive. "Your Honor," he said. "Internal security footage from Blue Marlin's secondary server. It shows Hale ordering evidence transfers. Nobody tampered with this one. I took it myself before they purged the system." Harper Lane accepted it silently. The screen flickered. There was Hale on camera surrounded by subordinates. His voice cold. "If anyone asks, the widow tripped. If the soldier asks questions, remind him accidents run in the family." The room erupted. Even the stenographer looked stunned. Hill's lawyer whispered something and suddenly gathered his papers. Harper Lane's verdict came crisp. Bail revoked. Full criminal inquiry authorized. "Mr. Hale, you are remanded into custody pending federal review." For the first time, his confidence cracked. Guards took his arms. Flashes went wild in the hall. Reporters screaming his name like vultures tasting justice. But the victory didn't feel pure. Because beneath every cheer, I saw Fiona's missing face, Julian's bloodstain, my father's unfinished questions. Justice didn't resurrect anyone. That night, I took the elevator up to the hospital balcony, where my mother watched the sunset. She didn't smile, just sank into the color, like she'd finally found quiet. "You think it's over?" she asked. "Maybe for him," I said. "And for you?" I looked over the town. Sirens, headlines, chaos softening into whispers. "For me, silence is the next battle." She nodded slowly, then win it gently. When I went back inside, Colin stood by the corridor window. "Feds will take over from here," he said. "They'll dig deeper. Contracts, deaths, your father's records. But there's something else." He handed me a thin envelope. "Military seal declassified today," he said. "Inside my father's last report, dated 5 days before his training accident." The final line froze me. "If anything happens to me, file marked HI indicates true source. Hi, Hale Industries." The circle closed just as the world thought it was over. He hadn't died in an accident. He'd been silenced the same way they tried to silence her. I tucked the file inside my jacket, the edges sharp under my fingers. The trial might have ended. The story hadn't because silence might lose in daylight, but it learns to whisper again in the dark, and I was done letting the dark speak alone. They locked Victor Hale and County, holding the same day the headlines screamed his downfall. But corruption doesn't sit quiet behind glass. It shifts, Claus whispers. By the second sunrise, 3 officers from his unit had already retired, and 1 forensic file disappeared. I knew the script well enough. Erased the trail, then rewrite history softer. The governor's office formed a special task group, parading cameras around as proof of progress. For most people, that looked like victory. For me, it looked like the eye of the storm pretending to be calm. Colin met me outside the courthouse steps, coat pulled tight against drizzle. "The feds are digging through 15 years of Hale Industries records. He said they'll find your father's files soon. What happens when they do? They'll find out the military accident report was forged, and that your father didn't die. He was murdered on Hale's order. The words landed heavy, but I didn't react. Shock had burned out long ago, replaced by something colder. Clarity. I went straight to the archive center that night. The federal agents hadn't reached it yet. Inside, dust settled like shame on every folder. File #High56D lay buried near the back, sealed with my father's signature, and one more beneath it. Victor Hale. The contents were worse than I'd imagined. Lists of shell companies tied to black budget contracts. Test operations funded off the grid. My father had found the paper route. Hale killed him to bury it. I left the building before dawn, fell safe inside my jacket. My breath and the fog looked like ghosts trying to speak. At the hospital, Mom was awake earlier than usual. She'd seen the news scroll along her monitor. Investigations, arrests, all the noise of justice, but she didn't look relieved. "There's always another Hale," she said quietly. I sat down, the folder on my lap. "Yeah," I murmured, "but maybe this time we end the pattern." Her hand trembled as she reached for my face. "End it without losing what's left of you." Later that afternoon, the press surrounded the courthouse again. Dominic testified publicly, giving dates, names, and stolen invoices. He didn't flinch when cameras turned on him. Maybe guilt aged him enough to stop fearing the price. When he finished, reporters asked why he was coming forward now. His answer caught me off guard because somebody finally refused to stay quiet about the woman we all pretended not to see broken on the floor. For a second, I couldn't breathe. The applause that followed wasn't for me or him, it was for her. But victory invites retaliation. That night, I walked into my mother's room to find her nurse missing. The monitors flickered for line disturbed. A folded note lay on the bedside tray. "Mercy can be arranged." No signature, just a logo. Hale Industries. I pulled the alarm cord, shouting for help. 2 on-duty guards stormed in. One held a syringe he shouldn't have been carrying. I recognized his face from the precinct photos. Sergeant Ryder, the man who'd laughed while breaking her legs. He froze seeing me, then lunged. Years of field training answered before emotion could. A struggle, a metallic clang, the syringe shattering. We hit the floor. The table flipped. The hallway filled with noise. When they pulled him off me, he kept laughing, blood mixing with spit. "You think you won," he sneered. "You can't jail a system. Maybe not, but you could starve it." The hospital locked down. Within the hour, the federal marshals arrived and took Ryder away. My mother was safe, but pale, her heart monitors spiking. She reached for my hand weakly. "Don't get arrested for me," she whispered. I knelt beside her bed. "I'm not getting arrested." I'm ending the story the right way. When she fell back asleep, I stepped into the corridor where Colin waited. "He wasn't acting alone," I said. "That note proves someone hires still moving pieces." He nodded grimly. "The DA word is Grant's been transferring assets under his wife's name. Guess where the money goes? Hale Industries. So corruption wasn't severed, it was regenerating." We filed the evidence through a federal contact that same night, a woman named Agent Eliza Brandt, who promised to surface it at the next press hearing. "We'll choke the network with its own paper trail," she said. But her tone hinted caution, the kind that comes from knowing monsters rarely crawl alone. I didn't sleep. That dawn, the air outside smelled sharper, a storm building somewhere unseen. Across the street, the first protesters gathered, with signs reading "Justice for the Widow." And in the Blue Shield, cameras swarmed. For the first time, truth felt louder than fear. But inside, things broke quietly. I went back to my father's old study, untouched since he died. Layers of dust, masked metals, and reports. Drawers unopened for years. One was locked. I forced it with a screwdriver. Inside lay an old VHS tape labeled Evidence Number 47. Training base footage. A strip of film from the day he died. I found a converter, set it playing. The grainy image showed soldiers assembling, the wind loud through static. Then a sudden explosion in the distance, voices shouting. The camera turned. Hale's younger self stepped into frame, shouting orders, face wild. Not with shock, but command. The mic caught his words halfway. "Tell Dean this is what happens when you dig." My throat went dry. He'd been proud of it. I sat watching until the tape snapped. Outside, distant thunder rolled over the horizon. By the time I reached the courthouse again, federal vehicles lined the curb. Reporters shouted that the DA had been taken in for questioning. Harper Lane herself met me on the steps. "We have enough now," she said. "Hale's empire is gone, but you need to disappear for a while. You've become the symbol they hate as much as they fear." I smiled faintly. Symbols don't run. Her answer was a whisper meant only for me. Heroes die fast, Blake. Maybe, but cowardice dies slower. That night, the hospital quieted again. Mom slept peacefully for once. Her monitor steady, her breath soft. I stood by the window, the city lights blinking below like nerves trying to heal. The blue shield that used to protect monsters was cracking. Every dishonest handshake, every denied report, every bruise ignored, all of it peeling away under the weight of truth. But cracks don't mean collapse. So I promised the night softly, until it breaks completely, I'm not done. And somewhere deep inside that promise, I heard my father's voice rising from memory, steady, quiet, proud. For a few days, the town moved like a place trying to unlearn its habits. Officers stopped waving at each other. People looked twice before shaking hands. Fear had switched sides. But corruption, that kind never sleeps. It just changes the locks. I started noticing shadows again. Cars idling too long near my mother's hospital. Calls that hung silent when I answered. It felt like the same storm returning in new uniform. I told myself paranoia was a soldier's leftover instinct, but instincts often right. Late one night, after most nurses left, I walked past the ICU hall to grab coffee. When I turned back, two figures in hospital scrubs slipped into my mother's room. My feet were moving before my brain caught up. Inside, one of them stood by her bedside, drawing fluid into a syringe. The other watched the door. The liquid shimmered faintly pink under the monitor light. Potassium. Instant cardiac arrest. Stop! I shouted, slamming the door open. Chairs clattered. The second man launched. A struggle. The syringe rolling underfoot, alarms screaming. Orderly rushed in seconds later, but the men flashed fake credentials and ran. I chased them to the stairwell. One pushed through the exit door. The other turned his head just long enough for me to see a scar in his eyes. Preston, still alive, still obeying orders. By the time hospital security swarmed the area, both were gone. Mom was shaken but breathing. They won't stop, she whispered when I returned. You can't fight ghosts. I don't fight ghosts, I said quietly. I chased the hand controlling them. The next morning, Agent Eliza Brandt met me in the hospital cafeteria. She wore a plain suit, eyes trimmed with sleeplessness. We traced money from Hale Industries. Half of it ends at a private medical contracting firm, Erasmus Biotech. She slid a folder across the table. Guess who sits on the board? The name burned. District Attorney Grant. He was supposed to be under investigation. Instead, he was cleaning the trail his old master left behind. Eliza leaned closer. They're trying to remove the only witness strong enough to testify before the federal hearing. If your mother dies, every case collapses. Then we take the fight to them. She hesitated. We can't legally hit a private company without warrants. What do you have? Access contacts? I smiled without warmth. Military training and nothing left to lose. By evening, Dominic joined me in the car outside Erasmus Biotech gate. He looked terrified but resolute. You sure about this? We're not breaking in, I said. We're visiting truth at home. We used maintenance uniforms from a nearby depot, slipped inside through a service door at shift change. The corridors smelled of bleach and fresh paint, perfect for hiding history. In a basement room labeled Archive C, rows of boxes lined the walls. Inside one, we found contracts between Hale Industries and the city. Drug testing cover UPS, falsified autopsy reports, payment ledgers with initials, the DA signature on two of them. Then Dominic froze, pointing at a smaller file marked Dean Family. Inside photos of my mother post-attack, timestamps, medical notes predated by weeks. They had planned it. Even the random home invasion report had been prepared before the night happened. Every breath hurt coming out. Dominic whispered. They had this ready before she even screamed. Before I could answer, footsteps echoed down the hall. We ducked behind shelves, lights slicing the room in narrow stripes. Two guards entered, one carrying his phone on speaker mode. A voice crackled through. I knew it instantly. Hail from jail, move everything by midnight, he barked. Our friend at Erasmus will be dealt with next. The soldier thinks he's winning. Let him think that. Dominic's eyes widened. He's controlling all this from lockup, I mouthed. Record it. The guards finished collecting boxes, leaving one file behind. We waited until footsteps faded, then grabbed it. A red binder labeled Contingency Z. Inside, instructions for eliminating both my mother and me. One name signed at the end. V. Hale. Outside, the night felt heavier than air. The stars looked dull, almost disgusted to be shining over us. Dominic shut the trunk on the stolen files. What now? Now, I said, we set his empire on fire. 2 hours later, those documents hit every news outlet, faxed anonymously through Colin's office. Copy sent to Eliza's federal unit. By sunrise, Erasmus Biotech raided burned across headlines. Grant vanished from his gated estate. Rumors said he was trying to cross the border, but while corruption collapsed in daylight, vengeance moved quietly in dark. That afternoon, Harper Lane called me personally. You stirred the hornet's nest, she said. Word is Hale's looking for leverage. The guards found an unauthorized visitation request under your mother's name. Someone planned to transfer her to state care. You know what that means? I'm not letting them touch her again. That evening, I waited by her bedside while outside. Storm clouds rolled toward the city. Mom slept, tired beyond words. I sat watching the monitors flicker, half light, half heartbeat. Each beep felt like time running short for one of us. When the first raindrop hit the glass, my phone buzzed with a restricted number, static, then a chuckle. Victor Hale's voice thick with prison echo. How's she tonight, soldier? I didn't speak. She's on borrowed time, he continued. People like her, people who don't understand power always pay twice. Once in pain, once in... I hung up. But before I killed the call, I heard one last word. Low, deliberate. Tomorrow. The next day, I arrived earlier than usual. Her room door was open, nurses flustered, papers scattered. For a moment, pure terror. Then she called my name softly. She was fine. Someone had come asking for me instead. Left behind a plain envelope on her tray. Inside a photograph of Fiona alive but bruised tied to a chair captioned trade. My blood ran ice. Hale had hidden her, kept her as insurance. The note beneath read the file you stole, 1 for 1 midnight. I stared at the photo until my vision shook. Then I folded it carefully, slipped it into my jacket. Dominic would call it a setup. Colin would call it suicide. But I didn't care. Some debts you pay face to face. Before leaving, I whispered against my mother's hand. Tomorrow they end this story or I do. She half woke, murmuring something I'd remember for the rest of my life. Light winds slow, but it winds outside. Thunder split the sky open like truth tearing through lies. And somewhere across town, Victor Hale's empire prepared for its final night breathing. By midnight, the city streets gleamed with wet reflections of light, neon, rain, and something more electric in the air. Inevitability. I parked 2 blocks away from the meeting spot printed on the note. An abandoned train yard long forgotten by the new developments rising on the horizon. It was the kind of place built for disappearances. Noise swallowed fast, screams even faster. I kept the original files under my seat. Brought a decoy folder packed with blank pages instead. Dominic didn't know. Neither did Colin or Agent Brandt. This meeting wasn't about exchanging evidence. It was about ending the story. Every footstep echoed differently in that yard. Rust creaked where ghosts could have spoken, and there she was, Fiona, tied to a steel chair under a flickering light, soaked in rain, face bruised but alive. Around her stood 2 men I didn't recognize and one I did. Preston, the smirking shadow that haunted every attempt at justice. But this time, his grin was trembling, because standing a few feet behind him was someone far more dangerous. The man wore no badge, no prison uniform, just a perfect black suit beneath a long coat. Bald, calm, face utterly blank, not Hale, someone worse. He greeted me by my father's name, Captain Dean. My heart lurched. None of the cops ever used that name, only men from deeper files did. He stepped forward, voice measured. You really think Victor Hale ran anything? He was just a gatekeeper. The real sealing of contracts, the coordination with the defense contractors, that was me. Hale worked for me. My fists clenched without permission. Who are you? He smiled faintly like I was late catching up. The man your father died trying to expose. My company bought his loyalty file before he filed it. I ordered his accident, but Hale earned your hatred beautifully, and now you've done all the work of exposing him for me. The system moves on. Captain's boy, just with quieter names. Fiona tried to speak through the gag. One of the guards shoved her head forward. The man in the suit continued unhurried. You brought my ledgers back. Yes. I lifted the decoy folder. You'll have to let her walk first. He tilted his head, inspecting me the way predators inspect distance. Trade first, then mercy. I tossed the folder forward. Preston grabbed it, flipped the pages once, confusion flickering. The man in the suit barely blinked. Blank, he muttered. Sometimes truth hides behind nothing, I said. Then the warehouse door creaked open behind him. Flashlights burst through the dark. Colin, Dominic, and Agent Brandt storming in with federal officers. Hands where I can see them, she shouted. Red dots scattered across the shadows. The man in the suit didn't even flinch. Ah, he said softly. Theatrics. He turned toward me, smiling as Preston drew a pistol. You brought an audience. Lovely. The silence stretched like wire before it snapped. Preston fired first. Dominic dove. A flash. A scream. Chaos ripping the stillness apart. Years of training took over my limbs. I pulled Fiona from the crossfire, cutting the rope, binding her, shoving her behind a steel pillar. Bullets shattered glass and rust. Preston collapsed with one final gasp, hit by his own ricochet. The suited man tried to run for the side exit. Agent Brandt's team closed in, but he triggered a small remote near his wristwatch. The far wall exploded outward, flames rolling like thunder. The shock threw everyone down. Smoke clawed the air. By the time it settled, the man was gone. No trace but echoes in the smell of wire-burnt metal. Outside, sirens wailed closer, but all I could see was Fiona trembling on the ground, whispering through tears. He said it didn't end with hail. The streetlights flickered overhead as we stumbled to the ambulance. Agent Brandt barked orders, half her earpiece dead. We'll hunt the ghost later. Right now she needs a hospital. But I already knew the suited man wasn't a ghost. His name had stayed hidden in plain sight all along, printed small in the contracts my father wrote. Nathaniel Cross, founder of Hale Industries, billionaire defense broker. My father had died trying to bring him down. Hale was just the farmhand cleaning the blood. By dawn, every screen in the country blared updates. Chief Hale imprisoned. Corruption network expanse. Fiona was alive in federal care. Dominic survived is wound barely. The people praised justice again, but I couldn't feel it. I kept seeing my father's face next to that logo stamped on the folder. Nathaniel Cross was still free, hidden behind corporations, politics, faceless money. At the hospital, my mother's hand fit smaller than ever in mine. It's not over, is it? She murmured. No, I said quietly. It's just shifted target. You sound like your father. I looked at the rain curling down the window. He didn't get to finish the story. Maybe I will. Outside, news helicopters droned over the skyline. Somewhere far from cameras, Nathaniel Cross was already rewriting the rules again. But this time, the ghost in his system had faces and files and witnesses that wouldn't disappear. My mother exhaled shakily. Don't chase another war. I'm not, I whispered. I'm bringing one home. Because sometimes vengeance isn't rage. It's the restoration of memory. And memory doesn't heal until every name behind the pain is spoken out loud. By the time the sun rose over the city again, the world thought justice had been served. The news loved the headline, Hero Soldier Ends Police Corruption Ring. They didn't see the cracks beneath the gold paint. Hale was in prison, yes, but Nathaniel Cross still held half the country's truth in his briefcase. My father's death, my mother's torture, those were the foundations of his empire. Everything that mattered was still breathing, expensive, and untouchable. Agent Brandt met me in a nondescript office near the federal district later that day. Her expression told me what I already feared. You can't touch Cross through the courts, she said. Every asset is in shell companies. Every witness tied to non-disclosure agreements that outlive them. So he wins. She shook her head slowly. Not if he answers to a jury bigger than a courtroom. The public. That's what you started with. Hale. Finish it there. The plan wasn't revenge. It was exposure. All light, no blood. Dominic, still pale from his side wound, handled the leaks through independent networks. Colin arranged the anonymous transfers of data, turning every hidden account into headlines. I hunted Nathaniel Cross on camera instead of in darkness. We gave the world the receipts. Fake contracts, military kickbacks, the silent deaths catalogued as training accidents. Every file traced back to his boardroom. Then came the day of reckoning. Cross Industries HQ sat like a glass cathedral downtown, built of money and arrogance. No armed guards, no walls thick enough to hide from truth. I arrived with cameras at my back, not guns. Reporters already buzzing from the leaks. Cross stood at the top of the lobby stairs surrounded by lawyers pretending shock for public sympathy. He spoke first. You're harassing a private citizen, he said. voice crisp as a blade. My business has no connection to your family tragedy. I played his own words from the recording. Fiona recovered, Hale confessing, then referencing the board's order. Cameras flashed. Cross's jaw tightened, a tiny crack in his calm. You profited from war crimes, Mr. Cross, I said, holding up my father's file. My mother walks with metal where bone used to be because of you. Tell me how that feels for a man who dictates patriotism from a penthouse. He sneered. Feelings are for the poor. That line became the moment the country turned against him. By nightfall, his investors fled, stock prices cratered, and subpoenas rained like ash. He wasn't arrested for murder, that part hid behind red tape, but the devastation of his empire was public, brutal, complete. Banks froze his assets. Government panels announced hearings on procurement fraud. He went from billionaire to symbol of disgrace in days. Still, the emptiness didn't fade for me. Success tastes bitter when the cost is so many bodies behind it. Dominic disappeared into witness protection. Colin took early retirement. Agent Brandt was reassigned, and me, once the soldier, felt like a ghost watching a machine finally stall. The next week, I visited my mother with the newspaper rolled in my hand. She was stronger now, learning steps again with metal braces hugging her legs. Each move looked painful, but her eyes had life in them. They're saying you brought the system down, she said, voice quiet but proud. I laughed once. Empty systems don't fall, Mom. They simply learn to hide better. Her eyes met mine, then kept them uneasy. We walked slowly down the recovery corridor together, her arm hooked through mine, machines humming their quiet rhythm beside us. Somewhere on the waiting room television, Cross Industries' statement played out, hollow apologies delivered by spokespeople paid to sound genuine. My mother paused and looked toward the screen. He'll never apologize himself, she said. He doesn't need to, I replied. The whole world already heard what an apology sounds like when power finally breaks. Outside the hospital, the wind had shifted warmer. Protest banners still hung around City Hall. People still marched, some seeking justice, others just seeking a show, but at least they were looking now instead of turning away. That night, standing in my father's old study, I found his metal case sitting untouched on the shelf. Tucked behind the ribbon bar was a note I had never seen before. Integrity isn't about fighting louder, it's about standing long enough for silence to crumble on its own. I closed the box slowly. The war, the revenge, the exposure, all of it led back to that single line. He had understood something I hadn't yet learned myself. Change isn't thunder, it's erosion. Quiet, relentless, final. At dawn, the final headline scrolled across the channel. Nathaniel Cross resigns from Defense Board, amid probe. No conviction, no clean closure, but something powerful nonetheless. The end of fear itself. I drove out to the pier where everything had started, the same horizon that once carried my deployments away from home. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was returning from a war. I felt like I was finally leaving one behind, because breaking bones had always been the easy part. Breaking cycles, that was the real fight. And maybe, just maybe, this time the world had actually started listening. Weeks passed before the noise finally settled. The city that once buried every crime beneath sirens had grown strangely peaceful. No parades, no outrage, just quiet recovery. Sometimes silence isn't emptiness. Sometimes it's healing, learning how to breathe again. My mother's doctors called her recovery a miracle, the way she relearned to walk with steel supporting her bones. I called it proof that strength never disappears, it simply reshapes itself. Every step she took echoed with something bigger than victory. It sounded like survival refusing to bow down. The federal hearings wrapped up in the same courthouse where this entire story had begun. Cameras flashed, lawyers smiled like carefully rehearsed puppets, and at the very center of it all, the truth finally stood unshaken. Nathaniel Cross's empire had fractured beyond any repair, blacklisted, bankrupt, forgotten entirely. When the final report was read aloud, I didn't celebrate. I simply turned to my mother sitting beside me in her wheelchair, watching the judge announce the findings. Her smile was small, but genuine. "You did exactly what I asked," she whispered. "You fought without becoming them." For the first time, I truly believed her. After the hearing ended, I brought her back to the same house they had once destroyed. The rooms smelled of fresh paint. The floors had been repaired, sunlight cutting through open curtains. A quiet home once again, broken things mended, ghosts finally at rest. She touched my father's old photograph resting on the mantel. "Do you think he knows it's finally over?" I looked at the portrait, those calm eyes, that half smile the army cameras never managed to capture. He knew before any of us did, I said. He just left the rest of it for us to finish. Outside, children rode their bikes down the rebuilt street. The town felt alive again, less afraid than before. People nodded to one another, like the world had remembered that decency could still exist. That evening, as the sun dipped low, I walked along the pier with my mother. Waves rolled in steadily, the sky turning gold all around us. The very same place where I had once sworn revenge, now filled with nothing but silence and sea. She stopped halfway and turned to look at me. "You could have killed every one of them," she said softly. "Why didn't you?" I watched the horizon where light met water, no clear lines separating them anymore. "Because bones heal," I said quietly, "but souls don't. And I didn't want mine rotting right alongside theirs." The wind carried her laugh, tired but light. When we got back home, I opened my father's last note once more. The edges had softened over the years, the words fading slightly. Legacy isn't revenge, it's correction. I finally understood what he'd meant all along. Revenge was never about returning pain for pain. It was about restoring balance, piece by piece, until the world started looking human again. Before turning in for the night, I placed 3 things on his old desk: his medal, my mother's broken hospital badge tag, and a photograph of Fiona smiling again under witness protection. Proof that anything shattered could eventually become whole again. Then I stepped outside into the night, the city lights stretching out beyond the hills, unbroken for once. Peace doesn't roar, it whispers. And that whisper felt louder than anything revenge had ever promised me.